Welcome to SteepleLess Church. We are glad that you are with us. You'll notice I'm sitting today. I'm sitting, but I am super happy to be able to get back. Even if I can't stand, although I may stand up, sit down. We're going to see how it goes over the next few minutes. This is my first time back. Most of you already know that I just had replacement of my knee. So I'm not yet 100%. Got my trusty cane just in case I need it. But I am just really, really glad to be back in front of you, talking to you again. I have missed you very, very much. Special shout out today for those of you who are not Christians. So for those of you who do not yet follow Jesus, whether you're in the room or on YouTube Live, or maybe you're on Facebook Live, or who knows, maybe you're watching this some other day, today is mostly for you, honestly. And I hope to answer some of your questions, especially about what you think about Christians. And I know some of you, you might be on here because someone's making you be on here. Maybe your parents made you come or sit down and watch this, or maybe there's somebody in your life that wants you to be in the room, and so you're watching this video, but you don't yet follow Jesus, or maybe you used to and you walked away from your faith. Again, just a shout out to you. Give me a few minutes. I hope I'll be able to answer some questions that you might have and help you understand kind of why Christians are the way they are. All right. So for those of you who are in the room, of course, the message guides are in the back. For those of you who are watching online, you can go to our website, SteepleLessChurch.com. You'll see in the header, there's tabs. One of them is Messages. Click on that and you'll find Message Guide. The Message Guide contains the scriptures we're going over today. It contains the call to action questions that you can do during the week, plus a lot of other good stuff, helpful information about the church. So if you don't have a Message Guide, go ahead and grab one and print it out, or however you would like to use it. It is a unique day here in Texas. For those of you who are local, we don't have quite as many in the room as we usually do because a big Texas storm blew in last night. I thought the house was going to pick up and fly away like the Wizard of Oz. And quite frankly, some are staying home just because it's really nasty out there. We were watching a tree that's 6-7 years old just turned over sideways here a little while ago. We're in a pool house, and I don't know if you all looked in the pool. There's a whole bunch of pool furniture in the pool right now because of the wind. So we also have one of our regulars. Please be praying for Sue for healing and that she would not be in pain. She is not with us today, not because she couldn't get here, but because she had health issues. So please be praying for her. She is so faithful to come. So please just keep Sue in your prayers. A couple other of quick announcements. We have a texting app that we use to send announcements to you. If you don't get notifications via text from SteepleLess Church, you can text the word SteepleLess to the number 84576. And that'll allow you to opt in, and then we'll remind you of service, we'll remind you of events that are coming up, urgent prayer requests, things like that. So if you don't get notifications from us, please text SteepleLess to 84576. Normally, we have a potluck on the second Sunday of each month. But the second Sunday of this month is Mother's Day. And I hope that you're spending the day with your mother or a mother who you love and who is important in your life. So we're not going to do the potluck that day. Instead, we're going to do it next week, which is Cinco de Mayo. So we thought, hey, that's a great excuse to have some Mexican food and get together as a body of believers. So if you are, doesn't matter if you're in the room, maybe you live here in Sonoma Verde. I know a few people that usually watch who live right here. We would love to have you over. So pencil that in on your calendar. Next Sunday, right after church, that obviously is the 5th of May, we're going to have the potluck at our home right here. All right. One more announcement. and it's really a prayer request. I want you to really be praying, please, this week for Israel. There has been a unique turn of events in the war that is happening in Israel, and I don't know if you've been paying attention or not. Quite frankly, some of the news has been so horrendous, I haven't really wanted to watch. But something that's important happened this last week. Iran fired missiles and rockets and did drone attacks against Israel. Now, the reason that's important is it is the very first time that Iran has directly attacked Israel since they became a nation back in the late 40s. Now, the reason that's important is because end times prophecy from the Word of God tell us that at the end of days, at the very end of this age, that one of the very last events that happens is all nations will gang up and attack Israel, and they will be led by a group of nations that includes Iran. And so all these wars, all these skirmishes that have happened over the last 80 years, this is the first time that Iran has directly attacked Israel, and that could be a prophetic sign. I think it is a prophetic sign. We don't know God's timeline. Does that mean that the end of days are a day away, a week away, a decade away, a century away? We don't know the answer to that, but that's an important event in prophetic history. So please be praying for Israel. Even though they don't love you, love them back. That'll make sense too as we go through today's message. And today's message is called Do As I Say, Not As I Do. We're going to be looking at Esther, of course. We're going to be in chapter 2. Last week, John went through verse 17. I'm going to actually back up and do 17 again, and we're going to do 17 through 23. It's a fairly short piece of scripture, but it's an interesting part of the story. And before we get there, we are going to take the Lord's Supper together. So go ahead and grab your elements so that we can have communion together. Today I'm just going to read a single verse. This verse is from 1 Corinthians. It's chapter 11, verse 26. And this is Paul, and he has written a letter to the church in Corinth, and he is trying to encourage them in their taking of the Lord's Supper. And he reminds them that when we take the Lord's Supper, because this is a public affirmation, we're doing this in front of other people. And when you do something in public, you're proclaiming that you follow Jesus. So in the process of remembering what Jesus did for us, which is why we take the Lord's Supper, when you do it publicly, you are proclaiming that you follow Christ. And so Paul says, for as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. And so right now, we publicly, in front of one another, for those of us who do follow Jesus, we proclaim our following of the Messiah Jesus by taking the bread and remembering the sacrifice of his body on the cross. We follow that by taking the cup, which is representative of the blood of Christ that he shed on that cross that day in Calvary. Thank you, Jesus, for the sacrifice you made to save each and every one of us. All right. Before I move off of the Lord's Supper, I would like to give you a quick challenge. You know, for many of you, you've kept your faith, your Christianity, if you would, to yourself. And you don't usually do things in public that would signal to people that you follow Jesus. For some of you, it might have been a big step to start even praying over your meal in public, where maybe the people at the tables around you would notice, hey, that person's praying over their food, they must be a Christian. So I'm gonna challenge you. Maybe you're at a place where you feel like you need to go maybe a step further. Maybe you even need something that will prompt some conversation with other people and you're not quite sure how to do that. Well, one great strategy that's simple but very effective is take the Lord's Supper at a restaurant. When you sit down to eat lunch, to eat dinner, whatever it is, whether you're alone or whether you're with a group, just take the Lord's Supper. You don't need to be loud. You don't need to bother anyone else. Just take communion together publicly. That's kind of my challenge for you. Think about, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to say in public and kind of raise your hand and go, hey, I follow Jesus. All right? So that's my homework for you this week, for you to think about. All right. You know, I love to tell stories, and I'm going to tell you, this is a fairly short story, but it's a pivotal story in my own life. Almost 20 years ago, I want to say 17, 18-ish years ago, I worked for a company called Inner Ceramic Tile. We were a tile manufacturer, and they're based right here in Dallas. We lived in another state, and I got a promotion, and in that company, all roads led through Dallas. If you were going to go anywhere with the company, it meant coming here to the DFW area, because that's where they were based. And so the man who was my boss promoted me and brought me here. In fact, many of you met him just a few months ago. He showed up here. He lives right down the road in Heath. But the guy who brought me to Texas, you may remember a guy named Randy, tall fella, funny, has a great laugh. Randy's the guy who brought me to Texas. Well, he had a really interesting way of handling, promoting people and developing people. And so in that company, if you worked for Randy, if you wanted to get a promotion, you had to prepare somebody else to fill your spot so that when they promoted you, someone could step right in and take your job. And so I was at a fairly high level in the organization by that point, and I had to train someone because I still wanted to keep climbing the ladder. So I had to train someone to do my job. And I fortunately had access to the entire sales force in the whole US, and I got to go ride with them and get to know them. And I chose a guy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Great, great guy. I haven't talked to him in quite some time. George Martinez, if you ever see this, please reach out. I would love to reconnect with you. But George was a sales rep in Albuquerque. And he was very, very good at what he did, and he was very trainable. And so over the course of years, I rode with him a lot because I wanted him to take my job, hopefully, the day that I would get my next promotion. Well, he and I were stopped at some little cafe for lunch, and the server brought our food, and I just simply closed my eyes, kind of did this. I didn't put my hands together. I just kind of stopped, opened back up my eyes. What I had done is prayed over my food, and as I opened my eyes, George is looking at me. He's like, and I'm looking, he goes, were you just praying? And I said, yeah. And he goes, wow, I had no idea you were a Christian. That is not what you want to hear. If you're a Christian and you think you're doing a pretty good job of showing people how you follow Jesus, and somebody who's spent hours and hours and days with you has no idea that I'm a Christian. That was an eye-opener for me that day. It was a turning point in my commitment to Christ. I vowed literally at that moment, I literally repented, said, Jesus, I am sorry. That's not going to happen again. That was a turning point. And I got much, much more serious about my faith at that moment. Because how the world sees us, Christians, this is where I'm really talking to you who aren't yet Christians. How do you see us? You see, we Christians see us as loving, right? We see ourselves as compassionate. But that's not how the world sees us. In fact, Usually, non-believers see us as hypocritical and judgmental. I went and looked at a whole bunch of surveys that have been taken, and depending on what year and what survey and what area, the number seemed to hover between 55% and 72% of non-Christians see Christians as hypocritical. That's terrible. That's awful. That is the last thing that we want people to see, isn't it? And interestingly, of those people who are decidedly non-Christian and jaded about it and want nothing to do with it, the three reasons currently that they point to are you're hypocritical, you're judgmental, and you're anti-gay. And as many as 85% of non-Christians cite those three things. And nothing could be further from the truth. Jesus is not hypocritical. Jesus is not judgmental, at least not the way they are thinking about judgmentalism. And he certainly is not anti-gay in terms of being against gay people. That is absolutely not who Jesus is, and not who we're supposed to be either. And yet the world sees us that way. Why? Why does the world see us that way? Are they all wrong? Unfortunately, I don't think they are. And I think it's because, for the most part, they can't see the difference in the way we live our lives and the way everybody else lives their lives. We go to the same movies, we drink the same drinks, we do the same stuff. And for the most part, people who claim to be Christians live just like everyone else, especially here in the South. You know, where we used to live in Sacramento, there's so few Christians that you stand out and you kind of get harassed about your faith. Here, it's politically normal to be a Christian, or to at least call yourself one. And I think what's worse is that we, people who claim to be Christians, then go on Facebook and quote scripture, and we talk about the Bible, but then we don't do whatever it was that's in the post that we just put online. You know, we post love your neighbor, and then we go hate our neighbor. And the world sees that, and they go, you're a hypocrite. And as I was really digging into this, I think I've truly figured out why this is. It was a very, very interesting question that was asked in one of these surveys. The question was simple. Do you believe that Jesus was an important spiritual figure? An important spiritual figure. In other words, was he a good man? That's really what the question's asking. Was he an important spiritual figure? Now, this is all responders, not just Christians, not just non-Christians, all people together. 84% said yes. He's an important spiritual figure. No, he's not. He is not an important spiritual figure. He's God. If they had asked, is God an important spiritual figure? People would have gone, well, no, God is God. He's not a good person. He's God. That's the disconnect. You see, because a lot of that 84% call themselves Christian, and they go to church, and then they live like everyone else. And James would ask the question, in fact, he did ask the question, is that a faith that will save you? And that's what I want you to keep in mind as we talk about our passage here in the book of Esther. And if you haven't been with us, we are walking through the book of Esther. We've just started. I think we're on week 4. We're going to finish out chapter 2. There's, 8, 9, 10 chapters in the book. So you got plenty of time to jump in and follow us as we go through what really is one of the most interesting books of the Bible. There are some very, very interesting storylines that happen. Even if you don't know anything about Christianity, even if you don't know anything about God, I think you'll be interested in this story. And we're gonna start there right now. We're gonna look at, again, Esther chapter 2. These are verses 17 and 18. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal turban on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. Then the king held a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his officials and his servants. He also made a holiday for the provinces and gave gifts in proportion to the king's bounty. So let's back up for just a moment. Last week we heard that the queen was asked by the king to basically get up and show off her body. And she didn't want to do that, and she suffered the consequences. She was no longer with the royal kingdom. That ended her reign, so to speak, her life as well. And so the king has gotten rid of the old queen, and he's looking for a new one. And it's funny the way it's worded here. The king loved Esther more than all the women. What do you think he loved about her? He didn't spend much time with her. Okay, he didn't love her personality. All right? By all accounts, Esther was a beautiful woman. And that's what the king loved about her. I mean, let's be honest here. Let's make sure we really follow what's happening in the story. He picked her because she was the best looking and had the sexiest aura about her, whatever you want to call that. All right, that's why he loved her more. It's not like she did wonderful things for people, had a great personality, was funny. No, she was beautiful and sexy, and he liked that, and he wanted her, and he chose her. Now, the fact that she was even in the lineup to begin with, you heard about the last couple of weeks. Should a good Jew have been there? Do Jews go showing themselves off? So think about, this is a woman who should have been very conservative with her clothing. King shouldn't have been able to see how pretty she was, certainly not how well proportioned she was. And he did. Tells you a little something about Esther. And it says she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins. Yeah, he chose her. And so now she's the new queen. She's the new girl, right? She's the new wife. It's kind of like the new person at work. The new person at work can get away with anything, right? Because they're the new person. They're the golden child, so to speak. And Esther, at the moment, has a great deal of favor because she's quite beautiful and the king is enamored with her. Don't forget, this guy spends most of his days tipping him back, all right? So he's not focused on a lot more than his own pleasure. And it's funny because it says that he held a great banquet. Now, this is a big party. This isn't like the potluck we hold at our house. This was a big deal. They would have spent the equivalent of hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars just on this party. Okay? And it's ironic that the author here clarifies not just a banquet, but Esther's banquet. Now, what would a Jew, a good, God-following Jew, what would that person do if they were throwing a banquet for all their Jewish friends? Would they all get drunk? No. Right? Would there be a lot of scantily clad women? No. It's not how it works, right? But this is Esther's banquet, and all of the things that are happening at this big party are all stuff that should not be happening to a young lady who is Jewish. Okay? Starting in verse 19, here's what we hear. Now, when the virgins were gathered together for the second time, then Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther still had not revealed her relatives or her people, just as Mordecai had instructed her. For Esther did what Mordecai told her, just as she had when under his care. All right, so let's make sure we all remember who Mordecai is. Mordecai is Esther's uncle, her caretaker. Esther has essentially been raised by this man, Mordecai. She looks up to him. She listens to him. He is her mentor, if you would. Okay? And it's interesting because we're going to find something out about Mordecai in a second. But notice what Mordecai is doing. Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate. He wasn't investigating people. He wasn't doing something proactive. He's hanging out. Now, it's not necessarily that he was doing something bad, but he certainly wasn't doing anything to promote the kingdom, to make the world a better place. He was just hanging out by the king's gate. He was sitting. All right? And in verse 20, the author tells us that Esther still had not revealed her relatives or her people. Now, that's kind of been leading up to this. I've kind of been giving you some groundwork to help you understand this. Remember how the Jews had all those rules and regulations? You know, God said, don't do this, do that. There was a whole bunch of stuff that the Jews were commanded to do. I don't know if you know this or not, but the reason God put most of those things in place, or one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons was so that everybody would know that person's Jewish. Look at, they do the ritual hand washing. They don't work on Sunday. They do all of these things that the rest of the people around them don't do. And they don't do things that other people in their society do. Okay? So if you were a Jew following your Jewish faith, it was obvious. Everybody knew you were a Jew. That was the point. One of the points. Obviously, all of those things were to love us and protect us, but also to help people know who we were or who they were. And in verse 20, it says, Esther still had not revealed her relatives or her people. What does that tell you about Esther? She's probably not doing anything that Jews are supposed to do. I mean, I have to imagine that a lot of the food that was served at her banquet was not kosher. You know, this is Persia. I got to think there was bacon wrapped something, right? And yet the king doesn't even know his wife is Jewish. Tells you something about Esther. Even her husband doesn't know. Here's the question, the one question I want you to consider for yourself today. If you met somebody new today, somebody new, would they realize you were a Christian because your actions were different? Imagine you're at a big lunch. Maybe you spend a couple hours at a lunch with a group of people, and that new person is so far away, they can't hear you, they can only see you. Would your actions be different enough that the new person would know that you follow Christ? That's something for you to think about. That's what hit me when George looked at me and went, "Are you a Christian?" He was shocked. I'm sure the king was shocked when he finally found out too. All right. I want to keep rolling. I want you to think about that as I continue here. We're going to finish out chapter 2, verses 21 through 23. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's officials from those who guarded the door, became angry and sought to attack King Ahasuerus. But the plot became known to Mordecai, and he informed Queen Esther. And Esther told the king in Mordecai's name. Then, when the plot was investigated and found out to be so, they were both hanged on wooden gallows, and it was written in the book of Chronicles in the king's presence. Now, I want to go back to verse 22. The plot became known to Mordecai. Again, here we see a supernatural act of God, because Mordecai's not doing anything. He just receives this information. He overhears them, however that happened, God basically set it up so that he would find out about it. It's not like he was proactively trying to do this, all right? He played a passive role. Mordecai was passive in his knowledge of this plot against the king, okay? But he finds out, and so he tells Esther, hey, there's these two guys, and they're plotting to kill the king. And Esther does go when it's her turn to go see the king. And I have to imagine that was more than usual at the very beginning, because she's the new queen, right? He's going to summon her because he wants to spend time with her. And she tells him, hey, there's these two guys. Mordecai found out about this plot. These two guys are trying to kill you. And so the king investigates Mordecai's claim, and it turns out to be true. And when it turns out to be true, both of those men were hanged on wooden gallows. Now, the word gallows actually means tree. And it's extremely unlikely that the gallows referred to here are what we think of as gallows. Because when I see hanged in the gallows, I think of a noose and a rope and being hung by the neck. Isn't that what you think of? That almost certainly is not the way these two were executed. They almost certainly were executed on stakes. Now, there might be some young people who are watching this video, so I'm not going to graphically describe to you how that form of death or, punishment takes place. It's extremely morbid. It's like crucifixion. It's unthinkable that you could do that to another human being. Here in the United States, if we do, even in states that we allow the death penalty, it's got to be quick and painless. Not quick, not painless. Okay? It's a horrible thing. So these two were executed. Now, it is interesting. The threat against King Ahasuerus' life, a very real thing. In fact, after the story of Esther in history, this king will be assassinated, and he'll be assassinated by his own prime minister. All right? So this king is very much in the crosshairs of his own people. This is not the first nor the last plot against this king's life. And then it says that this event, these two guys who are trying to kill the king, that whole conspiracy was recorded in the book of Chronicles. Now, I do want to make sure we understand, this is not the book of Chronicles in your Old Testament, okay? This is the book of Persian Chronicles. It's a Persian history that each king would be in charge of keeping, okay? So while I'm not an expert in how that worked, but so I don't know if things outside of the king's purview got into the book, but I do know that anything the king said to put in the book got into the book. And a non-biblical or a story from outside the Bible tells us that one night King Ahasuerus woke up and basically said, oh my goodness, that plot against me was not recorded in the book of Chronicles, and history records him as summoning the scribes to make sure that it got put in, and he sat there and watched them do it. All right? So those two men suffered the consequences of not following their king. Obviously, not just not following, but conspiring against their king, but clearly not following their king. And that is as far in Esther as we're going to go today, but I want you to realize that this punishment they received was extreme because their crime was extreme, at least from the king's perspective. He made an example of them. To some degree, I have to think the king thought, I will not be mocked. Especially this king, because we know he was very self-centered. He thought very highly of himself. He fancies himself a god in his own right. This week, we had an event happen in our own politics right here in the United States. I don't know if you heard about this, but our president, while at a pro-abortion rally, whatever, gathering, crossed himself, genuflected, made the sign of the cross like a Catholic would while a person was speaking about killing babies. As if to say, as if there was this sign that God somehow endorses abortion. And that video has gone viral, and that's certainly the way Christendom, especially the Catholics, are taking it. God will not be mocked. And the truth is, and we're going to talk about this in a second, we're supposed to pray for those who persecute us. We're supposed to pray for our enemies. We're supposed to pray for those who persecute us. We're supposed to pray for our leaders. Let's face it, our president is a feeble old man. He does not have much time left on this earth. He won't be around too much longer. And based on all his actions, he's not headed for heaven. He's headed for hell. We need to be praying for him. His soul is just about to hit the expiration mark. His time is about up. And I don't care who you are. The truth is, all of us deserve to go to hell. You and I and Joe Biden and everybody else who's ever walked this earth deserved hell. And so for those of us who have been saved by Christ, we should be so thankful that we would pray for the others who have not yet found him. So pray for your president. But I will say, God will not be mocked. I'm curious, though, in closing, how are you doing following the king? I don't mean following your president or any other politician. I mean the king. How are you doing following God? How's that working out for you? Because the truth is, we talked about how he gave the Jews a whole bunch of rules and regulations. He gave them a bunch of commands. Guess what? He's given us a whole bunch of commands too. Now, many of the commands that he gave the Jews are also commands to us, but we have some new ones. Right? You just read the New Testament and you'll find out God has some new commands for us. In fact, they're kind of next level. If the Jewish commands were like God 101, Jesus' commands are like God 201. They definitely stepped up in difficulty. So here's some of our next level commandments. These are things that you've been commanded to do. The first one is forgive those who hurt you or even try to destroy you, even try to kill you. We are to forgive. Not because they deserve it, but because God has forgiven us. And because God has forgiven us of much, we are commanded to forgive others. Okay, that's next level. That's not easy. Pray for your enemies. I'll be honest, I don't really like our president. I don't like what he does. I don't like what he stands for. That has nothing to do with loving him. That has nothing to do with praying for him. That has nothing to do with forgiving him and doing everything that we can do to show him the love of Jesus. He tells us to love our neighbor. There's another next level one, right? Love your neighbor, even if they're not lovable. I got pretty nice neighbors. I like the people who live around me. But I'm sure if I go to enough houses, I'll find one that's not very neighborly. And most of us understand things like, well, hey, imagine for a moment someone is out of town and they have a yard service that comes and cuts their grass. And maybe while this family is out of town, a real estate agent's trying to sell their home. And you find out that the realtors are going to show the property in a couple hours. But the lawn guy didn't show up. You, as a good neighbor, you might go grab your own lawnmower and go mow the lawn and edge it, make sure it looks really nice. So when those people come to look at the house, they'll find it kept and well-groomed. That would be loving your neighbor. But what if you were also selling your house? What if you've been out of town and you get home and your yard looks awful and your neighbor's yard looks awful? And you have an appointment for someone to look at your house, and the neighbor has an appointment to look at their house. And you've only got time to do one yard. You can't do both, you can only do one. Would you choose to do your neighbors and put them above yourself? That's the kind of selfless love that we're called to. It's not easy. In fact, he kind of takes it a step further. He says, seek the kingdom of God above your own desires. Even more specifically, take Jesus' yoke on yourself. Have you ever seen plow horses? Have you ever seen like a couple of horses that are yoked together? They've got that wooden beam between them, and maybe they're pulling a big plow and they're doing a field. Do you know why the horses pull the plow? Because they don't have a choice. They can't get the yoke off. If they could get the yoke off, she gone. Okay, they are not going to stick around. Plow horses plow the field because they have to. Jesus says, take my yoke upon you, and you don't have to. But I'm telling you to. You can take it off anytime you want. You are free to remove it. But I'm telling you to leave it on. See, the horse would kick that thing off and run away. We're supposed to stay. We're called to live a difficult life for Christ, even when it's challenging. And then the big one. Make disciples of all nations. This is next level. Make disciples of all nations. See, the burden of evangelism, baptism, and discipleship, it's on you. It's on me. But it's not any more on me as a pastor than it is on you, on another Christ follower. It is all our responsibility to share the good news, baptize people when they accept Christ, and disciple them. That's everybody's job. That's next level. That's hard. And it takes a lot of time. A lot of time. Bible's a big book. There's a lot to learn in this book. So here's the reality. There isn't anyone who knows you that should not be aware that you're a Christian. Every single person that knows you should know you're a Christian. Should. And they should have heard the good news from you, if they haven't already. They should know you're a follower, and they should know that you're willing to spend time with them and share the good news about Jesus. These are some next level commands. Let's pray that we can walk these out. Father, thank you for your Son, who literally lived a perfect life, a sinless life, a life radically dedicated to others. He didn't care about making money. He didn't care about building even a church. He didn't do anything for himself. He did everything for us. He spent every waking moment of his life basically either interacting with you or helping and loving others. Thank you for such an amazing example. You know, God, that we don't have the fortitude to be anything like Jesus, so help us. Help us to start walking in that direction, to be more like him today than we were yesterday. Because a little bit of good news can make a difference in someone's eternity even today. Lord, help us to be the feet that carry the good news to those that need to hear it. Amen. All right, so what now? What are we supposed to do with this? We're reading this story, the book of Esther. We're learning that Esther and Mordecai, not exactly what you would call model Jews, and yet, I don't want to be a spoiler here, but God's going to use them in an amazing way pretty shortly here. But it is really easy to see the devil at work. As we walk through this book, as we walk through even just the first 2 chapters, very easy to see Satan, how he is influencing the king, Mordecai, Haman, all these people, very much influenced by the devil. The truth is, it's just as easy to see how the devil is working today. You don't have to look very far to see the people around us. What are they doing? What are they saying? What are they watching? What are they promoting? Evil, right? It's really easy to see the enemy in our society. So where did you see yourself in this story? As you listened, did you see yourself as one of those who's gotten caught up in the world and who's basically indistinguishable from the others in the world? Or did you see yourself as someone who's set apart, who's really trying to live a life that's different than the rest of the world? And I wonder, are you focused on the commands of your king? You know, commands aren't optional. Are you focused on those commands? And if you're like most of us, look, at my points in life, and that story I told you earlier today about George and praying over my meal, that wasn't that long ago. I've been a believer for over 30 years. That story happened about 15 years ago. Okay, it's not like I was 2 days, after I had accepted Christ. I had known Jesus for certainly more than a decade when that happened. How are you doing following Jesus? Because that's one of the main reasons we're here. Please reach out to us. How can we help you do what the Lord wants you to do? We would love to help you. Maybe for the first time, maybe you need to start following Jesus. I said this message was mostly for you who either don't yet follow Christ or who have walked away from your faith. How can we help you take that next step? Maybe you need to rededicate yourself. Maybe you need to come to the Lord who's been calling you for years. All right, home groups, go ahead and do the call to action questions now with your group. If you're in the room, again, if you don't already have one, pick one up in the back on your way out the door. So this week we saw how Mordecai had favor with God, right? Mordecai learns of this plot. Next week, plot twist. It's going to be fun. Don't miss it. Thank you for being part of the SteepleLess Church family. We love you, and we'll see you next week.